I want to make sure that Mike has a chance to hear Gareth before he has to leave, so we've now rescued the computer. Thank you, and thank you, Liam. I will come back to you, though, David, and ask you about something at the end of your presentation, and this is for later, but you gave us a wonderful account of why it was in your interest to build all these local supply chains and the farms and the investments and the transport and the warehousing. And then suddenly at the end you said, of course we can't do this without support from donors and partners. And that was a contradiction to me, and I want to come back to you on that because later. But hold the question and then give me the floor. Thank you.
Right, good evening everyone. Let me try this again. Mike, Simon, Jane, David, thank you all of you, and in the next 15 minutes I'm going to try and talk through some of the issues that we're facing in these areas. We've heard from Mike about the strategies and policies the government has taken and the vision that it has of the future. We heard, I think, 3 interesting insights from Jane about the role of business needing to do what it does best, driving growth, scalability, and the need to infuse the developmental agenda, the environmental agenda with our core business strategies. And then we heard, David, from you around the role of the history of Diageo, I think some fascinating insights on the supply chain. And in many ways, what I want to do in the next few minutes is reflect on those same things and kind of reinforce them. And so, really, this evening I want to do 4 things. Firstly, to briefly talk about De Beers. I'm assuming that many of you are familiar or know about the organisation, and I can't possibly do justice to it in a short time. I do want to talk about what we feel we've learned through this crisis, and some of the insights in particular that we take away and the impacts that they are undoubtedly having. And you heard some of the statistics in terms of what it's doing to developing society. So I want to talk very briefly about that. I want to talk about what we call our sustainability partnership model and a number of insights there. And then lastly, I want to finish with talking about why I believe value-driven organizations or businesses are going to be part of the future. And what we're trying to do in De Beers to make our own business a value-driven organization and why we think that's just good business. So those are the 4 things that I want to do very briefly in the time ahead. Now let's see if we can get this to work. Right, I mean, firstly, just a brief graphic. De Beers has operations in many different parts of the world, but our mining operations are overwhelmingly in Southern Africa and in Canada. We have 15 different mining operations, 13 of which are in Southern Africa. We employ about 16,000 people, 13,000 of them are in that part of the world. Our business model essentially is one of partnership. So if you look at all these different companies that are shown on the screen here, in almost every one of them we have a partnership with somebody, more often than not with the government. And the particular reason for that is that I think when governments look at diamonds, they think of diamonds as a sort of national treasure. So invariably, maybe with a company like Diageo, there isn't a need to be in partnership. But over the years, for one or other reasons, De Beers has ended up in all sorts of partnerships. And then the last slide really just on where we seek to lead in our industry. It's really across these 4 dimensions. Firstly, on the supply side, miner of choice, exploring and mining in different jurisdictions. Secondly, in terms of the marketing and distribution of our product, we sell a discretionary luxury product. And so we have to do an enormous amount to actually persuade people to buy it. To be the employer of choice and to employ men and women across the world who are capable of doing their jobs and to do them in an outstanding way. And again, I want to come back to that theme later. And then lastly, partner of choice, which, as I've said, is going to be one of my major themes for this evening. So if we reflect then on these extraordinary times that we've been living in, I mean, it's just a little over a year before we had the collapse of a household name. And we know the consequence that that has had in terms of business across the world, and in particular across the developing world. And we could spend the whole of this evening just talking about everything that has happened in this space. Our particular industry has been affected enormously. And why? Well, firstly, we obviously have experienced a drop in consumer demand. We sell, as I said, a discretionary luxury product. 40% of our end market is in the United States. So that's not a great place to start, and it's clearly going to be something that's going to tax you in terms of how you manage your way through it. Secondly, we've had, like many other industries, a significant inventory overhang where business geared itself to a certain level and then found that, at a lower level of demand, there was going to be an enormous amount of stock that was going to need to move its way through the system. And lastly, diamonds are the most concentrated form of wealth in the world in terms of value to weight ratio. So unsurprisingly, the things that have impacted on the banks have obviously flowed over and impacted enormously on our industry. So constricted liquidity and the willingness of banks to lend $14 or $15 billion to the downstream industry has had a significant impact. What are the insights that we take away from this whole scenario that has unfolded over these last months? The first thing is that confident leadership really matters. And it's been extraordinary to see how, through a leadership role that De Beers is playing principally, but I think there are many analogies in other industries and those of you working in other companies. I'm sure Diageo will come up with its own examples. But confident leadership really matters. Actually being able to stand up and say, it's okay, we've been through similar kind of things, and this is the kind of agenda and process we need to follow, has really made a big difference. So we've had sort of Obama-esque town hall sessions all over the world, talking to our customers, talking to clients, talking to banks, talking to the downstream industry, talking to people in all sorts of different parts of Africa about what we're all experiencing and the need to actually stand together to find a way through this. The second thing clearly is focus on cash management. I mean, this crisis is principally caused by a banking set of circumstances, and so a myopic focus on cash management has been key. Clearly addressing overheads, making sure you're focusing on the core business. But it's really this one, the partnership issue, that I want to talk to you about today, because one of the key insights for us is that it's in times like this that your business model is going to be tested. And if you've got really strong and well-developed 50/50, be a source of great competitive advantage. And that's certainly our experience. The second insight that we would have into our sustainability partnership model is the need, particularly I now use Africa as the example rather than, I know your developmental agenda looks at many parts of the world, but I feel most qualified to talk about Africa as an African myself. But, you know, what makes me enormously proud is that across our African operations, we have an extraordinary range of men and women running those businesses. So, you know, somebody like Inga, if we talk about women in mining, is actually running our Namibian business. And I think the strength of having citizen management, particularly in more difficult times, actually proves itself again and again, because the ability of these kind of people to explain and drive through a local agenda has proved itself, I think, in these current circumstances. David, you talked a lot about the supply chain, and you know, again, I would underline that not because it's a corporate social responsibility activity, but just because it's good business, to find ways to involve smaller entities or agricultural produce in your supply chain as part of your core business, not as an add-on or something that you do kind of on weekends, but as a fundamental part of your business, has proved its worth to us again and again. This entity here has set up 59 different businesses over the last 11 years, and now employs, or those businesses, I should say, employ about 1,200 people. So it can be done, but you've got to find the right way where you can actually, there's no good setting up a business to supply something back to yourself that's going to be more expensive. You've actually got to look at things that can be done competitively. It's probably not going to be large earth-moving equipment, but there are going to be a raft of other things that can be provided by local business in a successful way. Insight number 4 really talks about what the term we use, beneficiation or value addition. And again, I mean, it was one of the questions out of the observations earlier to you, Minister, and I think really importantly so. What is the business model of the future for larger corporates operating in different parts of the supply chain? Together with the Botswana government, we have focused very much on this area of how do we take rough diamonds, uncut diamonds that we've mined, and how do we add value to those in a way that is sustainable. And so in Botswana, we built this building about 3 years ago at a cost of about $80 million. And about a fifth of the entire Botswana production is now being routed through 18 factories in Botswana. About $500 million that is being put as rough into those factories to be converted into polish to be sold on the world market. It hasn't been easy, and clearly in this kind of environment, it's being tested to its limit, but it is succeeding. It's created about 3,000 jobs, and it's going to be a very important part of the value addition process over the years ahead. Insight number, sorry, let me just continue on with that point for 1 second. What has really interested me about the value addition element to this business in Botswana isn't just the statistics of 18 factories and 3,000 jobs. It's actually the flywheel that has spun off a number of these different activities which have made commercial sense to the people that are doing them. So take that one. I mean, we said this current crisis is at its core a banking crisis, but through this particular business model, you've got the company ABN that in and of itself decided if there's going to be this kind of downstream activity in Botswana, let's set up a branch there. So ABN, one of its, in fact, probably its most important African branch, is now located, we could go there today, it's there and operating and supporting a downstream industry. And there are a number of other similar kind of examples that I could use in terms of the flywheel effect that I think these initiatives have. Inside 5 is about supporting healthcare. And again, I don't think, of course you do this because it's the right thing to do, but you also do it because it's good business. To have a healthy, productive workforce that's taking care of itself is absolutely fundamental. So we're doing a lot in this space. Of course it costs time and money. Our first big step is to get our entire workforce to know its status. So that's really what this picture is all about. It's actually saying everybody who's working in any operation has to know what he or she, what your status is, and from there things can unfold forward. So I think that's a really important part of doing business. Jane, you talked about the need to fuse together the environment and climate change. And where I fundamentally do agree is that the arena of climate change and the importance of business taking steps in this area is going to be fundamentally part of every business and every organization in this room tonight. It isn't going to be an added extra. It's going to be an absolutely critical part of what we do. This mine here, which is Draneng Mine, which is the largest diamond mine in the world, and in fact the Rapa and Venetia, which are the 3 biggest mines in the De Beers family of companies, are all situated in semi-arid areas. It may not quite look like that because that's probably summer rainfall. But the problem that we have is a very small change in annual rainfall will literally switch these operations off. And just to give you statistics for a minute, these 2 mines, Arapa and Draneng, you see in the picture, contribute 33% of Botswana's GDP and 60% of its foreign earnings. So, this is not just a kind of nice to have, it's a massively important part of the economy of their country. And needing to sustain those means you've got to come up with some pretty smart ways of conserving water, reutilizing it. Your slimes dams have got to be highly effective. You may have to put them underground, you may have to cover them in some kind of way. And so we're now investing in a whole range of different technologies to capture surface water, to recycle water, and so on and so forth. And I've been fascinated because for me it's a completely new area that one's developing an understanding on, and it's becoming a very important part of our leadership agenda. A number of speakers tonight talked about, and of course it's a fundamental part of the white paper, is international governance initiatives. And it's easy to be skeptical perhaps about the impact some of these might have, but I can share with you firsthand the learnings around a number of these different organizations. Andy's spoken more previously and at some length about the Kimberley process. And of course, like anything, it's not perfect. But today, about 99% of all diamonds in the world do flow through the Kimberley process. There are 70 or 80 sovereign governments that are involved in the Kimberley process, and many tens or hundreds of different NGOs, members of civil society around the world. It can be improved, it's not flawless, and it's going to have all sorts of bumps in the road. The most recent one being, what's the answer and what's the strategy going to be around Zimbabwe and so on and so forth. So one doesn't pretend that there aren't problems, but because they're issues that have to go after and be addressed, in my view, it means these things are starting to take meaningful action and grapple with meaningful issues. And it can be done. And I really do believe that business together hand in hand, and that's why really my theme is around partnership, because business can't do it on its own. And maybe that was the point really, Simon, I think. Certainly in this area, business can't do it on its own. But equally, governments can't do it without business. So this is about making sure you get an integrated approach across these massively important issues around transparency, around governance, around corruption, and so on and so forth. And then lastly, really, around creating wealth. I mean, you can't do points 1 to 7 unless you're making money. And at the end of the day, you've got to find a sustainable way to make money that aligns itself with your overall business. I work for an interesting organization because our turnover last year, this year is going to be pretty abnormal, was 6 billion. And of that 6 billion, 5 billion was actually paid back to Africa. either for labor or for various taxes or royalties or whatever it may be. So we're a kind of Robin Hood type business where we sort of take from wealthy people in America and largely send it back to an African kind of environment. But, for anybody out there who thinks that business can't make a contribution, I mean, I see firsthand in everything that I do, and I know that many other organizations can say, clearly business can make a difference, but obviously it depends how you do it. So, that's a bit of a chopping block for our own learnings about sustainability, about partnerships, and I've cantered through that pretty quickly. But if you go on our website and you look under our report to society, you'll find these things there in enormous detail, and I'd encourage you to read it at its leisure. Let me just finish quickly, having talked about what business we're in, having talked about the impact and some of the insights that we've taken away from the crisis, and having talked briefly about our sustainability partnership model. I wanted to reflect just in closing on the importance of working for value-driven organizations. I mean, like all of our organizations in the room, we'll all have, purpose, visions, and value type statements. And I mean, for us, our vision statement is to unlock the full potential of our leadership position across the diamond pipeline in a safe and sustainable way. And for any company you'll open, there'll be, a purpose, vision statement, etc. And they're all, each one's been sort of thought through in there. But for me, the much bigger insight wasn't so much around purposes and visions or missions and visions. It was around values. And I wanted to share with you for 1 second some work we did. We collected men and women from all our organizations across the world. We got them together and we said, now we want to be a value-driven organization because everything that we do, we want to interrogate against a set of values. Each one of your organizations will or has already got your own list of values. For us, it was being passionate, pulling together, building trust, showing we care, and shaping the future. Because those were the 5 things that we felt were most important for our particular business. They may not be right, and you can't plug and play these for other businesses, but they were right for us. What was really interesting is that those words meant nothing, because 80 to 90% of our workforce, English isn't their first language. So you kind of show you care, and it gets translated into 5 or 6 different languages, and by the time it's morphed its way out to somewhere miles out in Saroe or wherever it may be in Botswana or somewhere in Angola or whatever, it doesn't mean anything. But we developed these symbols so that the people could translate that into whatever their particular local language. And the other day I was up in the northern part of miles up in that sort of tundra in Canada, and these same values had been translated into Inuit, in a form of words that local people understood. And I found that really interesting and exciting. So wherever you go now on a De Beers family mine, you will find these symbols. No words. And people need to understand, what does it mean when you put that on the tail of a plane, or you put a flag up that makes that statement? And how does that pull an organization together? And what does that mean about operating differently? Whatever happened in the past, it's the past. But if we're going to look forward into the future, what does it mean about the way we have to operate? And so that was a little insight that I just wanted to share with you in terms of trying to glue things together and trying to make things concrete in a very simple, workable way with just a set of symbols that actually says, this is the way we want to drive this business or this activity. I mean, we do things like we have sort of business case studies where we try and present a very difficult scenario. If you've got to dig a big mine here and there's a local community and that community's got to be moved, and how the hell do you live these values when you've got to do that? And that sort of question that we had earlier about, should you send people who are producing oil home and stop the CSR? I mean, these kinds of issues that are real issues and they've got to be thought about, and you've got to find a holistic solution without just saying, well, it's all too hard, so we're not going to do any of it. And one of the questions you might ask, and it's my final slide, is, well, why do we do that? And the reason we do it is because at the end of the day, the very product we sell depends on people's attitudes to it. And if they don't think that it's going to do good, and if they do think that it's blood diamonds and that it's destroying countries like Sierra Leone when you watch the movie, nobody's going to buy it. So, a lot of this, perhaps I'd like to pretend that it's all about being a good guy, and I hope it is, but far more fundamentally, it's actually about saying it's just good business. And it's the right way to do things, because if we make our product our guide, and actually I think there would be parallels for almost every other product and service, where more and more I think the consumer of the future is going to be interrogating what we do as business, the service we sell, the bank we use, the product that we manufacture and say, is this on the right side of history or not? And, the past is the past, and people will have a particular view of that. But the real question is this making a difference? And, these are just some insights that I wanted to share with you in the time that is allotted. I'm obviously delighted and happy to chat about it, but, I really do enjoy the opportunity of just coming and sharing a bit of this with all of you. Thank you very much.